talk about this book or her story, I had to begin with my earlier one. So the Anna May Wong story and the book on Anna May Wong, it is a biography of her, of her, but it's really also the third installment of this trilogy, what I like to call Rendezvous with America, in which I try to tell really describe kind of the epic journeys of Asian Americans in the making of American history. And so this began with Charlie Chan. So interestingly, I was talking to some of the staff and the faculty here. I feel quite honored to be here today because about a decade ago when this book first came out, I was also invited to speak here. And at the time, the director of the center, so I had to fly from, at the time I was doing a fellowship at Cornell, Ithaca, little airport in January, getting out of there, snowy, it's very difficult. So I got stuck at the airport in Detroit. I had to stay overnight over there and then came over. But anyway, so had to begin with this iconic kind of, but also controversial figure named Charlie Chan, right? Earlier, Professor Dale said that this is an intergenerational group because I bet many of these young students will not, you have heard of Charlie Chan, but you probably have not seen any film. So anyway, so this is my first book actually, and this is about this icon of Chinese Americans, and supposedly he's a funny, wise Chinese detective from Honolulu, right? And it's very kind of controversial figure because of this practice of yellowface, right? Because the actors who play Charlie Chan are mostly, predominantly Caucasians. And Warner Olin, for instance, in a minute we're going to talk about him because he's actually best friends with Anna May Wong. And he's actually my favorite Swedish actor, coming to America, Americanized himself, and then made a big name of himself playing Chinese. Dr. Fu Manchu, the evil Chinaman, and then Charlie Chan, the good, Chinaman. And so for that reason, when I was first, trying to write this book, I totally understood the issue is that it's a very divisive issue in the sense, millions of baby boomers growing up in the, 60s. This is their, Sesame Street, because Saturday morning, that's the rerun of Charlie Chan's. And so when this book came out, I was, invited to speak on NPR and on Point. We take live calls, and many listeners will call in and say, recollecting, sharing their stories of watching the Charlie Chan, reruns on Saturday morning with their grandfathers and stuff, and sweet memory. But to a lot of Asian Americans, and this is a kind of insult, right? Because of this demeaning characterization of Asians, because supposedly he's very wise, but he also speaks broken English, and fortune cookie aphorism, kind of befuddling, and this kind of poker face inscrutability, in other words. So this is really my first book. From that, I moved on to the other. Again, very famous story of Asian Americans is Siamese, the original Siamese twins, Chen and An Bunker. They're called Siamese twins. Actually, it's a marketing technique. They were actually Chinese. They were Chinese born in Siam, today known as Thailand. Their father was a Chinese fisherman who migrated from China. And so they were born, conjoined body, Siamese twins. They're conjoined at the base of their livers. And throughout their lives, they lived, that way. So imagine growing up in a little fishing village in Siam. They learned to swim. They learned to, they lost their father when they were pretty young. So they became dog farmers. They raised dogs, sell dog eggs, help, supporting their sibling and their mother. And until one day, when they were about 14, they were discovered by a traveling Scottish businessman. He was coming down the river, and there was twilight time, and Robert Hunter, the Scottish traveler and businessman, saw in the river, in the water, like this strange creature, as if coming out of Greek mythology, four arms, but two heads, one body. And when he came closer and realized, just teenage boys, but they conjoined together. And 19th century, this early 19th century, for those who study American history or history, you know this is a period of freak shows, freak shows. And Robert Hunter immediately kind of realized a golden opportunity. So he eventually convinced their mother, basically bought them from their mother at $500. You know, in my research, I was happy to find the original contract, handwritten contract, by which he bought from their mother $500. So they came to America after a long trip from Bangkok to Boston. They arrived in Historical Harbor in Boston in 1828. They arrived at the age of 18. And so for 3 years, they basically slaved for their owners. Robert Hunter with American ship captain, Abel Coffin, actually, a ship captain. They were their owners. And so they showed themselves and did the freak show, made a lot of money for their owners. But the reason I was so attracted by their story is that, these are, of course, studying Asian American history, telling the stories of Asian Americans. Of course, we suffer from racism, humiliation, and everything. But one thing we have to emphasize that, we are just not victims. We're actually very creative. We try to fight back. And so for them, their story, amazing story, is that when they turned 21, it's not that they can drink. It was still Puritan America. There was no drinking. But when they turned 21, legally, they became adults. So they basically told their owners, like, we are done. You can't do anything about us. So they basically did a Siamese, Declaration of Independence in my home city, Buffalo, New York. Wrote a letter to their owner saying, we are done. You no longer own me. And they basically retained the manager who used to work for the owners. Now the manager will work for them. And so for the next decade, they continue to travel on the road, hitting village by village, travel all over the world, made a lot of money for themselves. Of course, they suffer from, humiliation, insult, because they were regarded basically as medical, pathology and, anomaly and disability, disabled body. So they were maltreated, but they knew exactly what they were doing because they would just take your money. You have to pay to insult me. So after a decade, they accumulated, really amassed a lot of wealth. By today's standards, about a few $1 million, really. At the time, when they retired at the age of 28, they amassed about $100,000 at the time. That was a lot of money by the standard that. So they retired very comfortably to a very small village in northwestern North Carolina, between Tennessee and Virginia, the Triangle area, because they just wanted to be far away from the world as possible. After being a decade, being the prying eye of the public, they just want to get done with it. So they settled down eventually in this Mount Airy, North Carolina, which is also the hometown of Andy Griffith. Maybury, for those who know Andy Griffith show, Maybury is based on Mount Airy, and that's the underbelly of that lily-white American story is actually the Siamese twin story. And their story took a somewhat strange turn, had a romantic turn first, is that they managed to marry 2 white sisters. Okay, so the bodies are still conjoined. So imagine the wedding night. French has a term for it, but this is more than ménage à trois. It's more. It's 2. They got really busy. They ended up having 21 children. Okay, and today the Bunker clan actually every year they have a reunion. At the last Sunday weekend of July, they have the Bunker reunion in Mount Airy at that church they helped build actually. So anyway, but the other strange turn of the story is that they became slave owners. They traded slaves, So when the Civil War broke out, imagine which side they stood. Of course, for Confederates, and they actually send their eldest sons to the battlefield to fight the damn Yankees. And their sons got injured, captured, but came back alive. And as a result, they lost all their slaves, which is major investment. At the height of their wealth, before the Civil War, they owned about over 30 slaves, and that's actually a lot of wealth. But also they made a foolish investment, is the Confederate bonds. They thought it's just Confederate bond. After the Civil War, these bonds are basically is worthless. So they eventually had to go back. The only asset they had left was their own body. So at the middle age at the time, they went back to the road, and eventually Chang died first, and followed because still together. So this is their story, strange story, and followed by Anna May Wong. And here's the third installment of the Anna May Wong story. She was born in the year of the dragon. It's exactly actually 120 years ago by the Chinese calendar, 1905, which is the year of the dragon, and this is another year of the dragon. Also, not just the year of the dragon, it's the wooden dragon this year as well, and that's her. And her father was a Chinese laundryman. So this is a picture of early Chinatown in Los Angeles. And of course, about 3 decades prior to her birth, 1871, for those studying American history will know this scene, the infamous Chinese massacre. Los Angeles at the time was only a small town of about 5,000 or 6,000 souls at the time. And there were about 200 to 300 Chinese. Actually, most of them came down from San Francisco because San Francisco became really crowded. And Southern California, it's kind of fertile ground. So they migrate down there. And on this night, white mobs invaded, basically torched Chinatown. And they brutalized, killed, lynched, and burned 18 Chinese. So Anna May Wong was born about only 3 decades after that. So it's a very kind of hostile environment. And of course, they will lead to the infamous 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act and everything. But so like I said, I'm pretty sure many of you are quite familiar with some of this part of the story. I just want to highlight what did I do in terms of researching her story. For instance, laundromat. Okay, laundromat is interesting because not just because it represents Chinese labor, right? History, right? There are 2 things. One is chop suey joint, and the other is a laundromat, right? My friend John Yao, who's a poet, who used to teach poetry workshops, and he always tell the students don't ever write about a poem about your parents running a laundromat, because every student will start writing about that, because it's Chinese laundromat or laundry. It's like to draw a bad comparison, it's like a taco truck or a Jewish kind of clothing store. It's kind of every ethnic group has this kind of staple business, right? Laundromat, Chinese laundry. So imagine the years my Charlie Chang book came out. I gave about, I think, 50 talks that year all over the country, especially like Midwest, like Ohio or something, because the creator of Charlie Chang character, Elder Biggers, was a Ohio man, Warren, Ohio, Buckeye. So I remember I gave a talk there, and some audience member came up to me and said, the only thing I wanted to say is that they grew up in a town where there's only one Chinese family, and guess what kind of business they have? It's either laundry or restaurant. So each Chinese chop suey joint or laundry is really a Chinatown all by itself. Most Americans will be first exposed to so-called the Oriental experience was by contacting, interaction with a Chinese laundryman or a restaurant owner. So in that sense, laundryman, and also in cities like Los Angeles or San Francisco, the city ordinances will not allow Chinese to live beyond the confines of Chinatown. Okay? Of course, you cannot buy houses. Even if you want to rent, you can, unless you actually live in your business, unless this is your business. So in that sense, Chinese laundrymen were really the vanguards who ventured beyond the confines, the safety net of, of Chinatown. So that's what Anna May Wong's father did. He eventually moved his, laundry out of Chinatown, and that really exposed, young Anna May Wong to more kind of a multicultural environment, which is very important for her later on for her career becoming a global star, right? And the other aspect of Chinese laundry is that it has to do with early cinema, okay? So early cinema, of course, is silent film, and imagine the early years. Chinatown was one of the favorite, sets for filmmakers, right? I guess in those years, traffic wasn't that bad at the time, so it's very easy to drive from Hollywood across town to LA, to Chinatown, to shoot the scenes. And early cinema, as you know, it's mostly what we call the live stream today. You set a static camera on the street, and you let the street walk into you, taking the street scenes. Because early cinema is mostly about curiosity, shock and awe, curious scenes. So most of the early films, for instance, silent films, they were about Chinese laundromat, barber shop, funeral procession, wedding procession, and of course, Chinatown is like a ready-made set, right? Because of the curiosity, the exotic costumes, people walking around, barbecue dogs hanging on the window and everything. And laundromat also, because of the robotic movement, and early filmmakers were really attracted by that. So in a minute, Louise asked me for this lecture, to recommend some books toward the end, like in addition to Anna May Wong's story, what else, you want to read. One book I will recommend is this. It's by this Austrian filmmaker by the name of Joseph von Sternberg, very famous film director who made Shanghai Express later on, starring Marlene Dietrich and Anna May Wong. And coming from Austria, eventually Joseph von Sternberg wrote a memoir. And guess how he titled his memoir? Strangely, he titled his memoir, Fun in a Chinese Laundry. Had nothing to do with Chinese laundry, but early years, because of, I guess he called that partly because it's just a lot of hard work. Chinese laundry is a lot of hard work. But curiously, actually has to do the umbilical cord between Chinatown, the strange setting, Chinese laundry, the labor, and and early cinema. So, and also, I call this kind of early, stage of techno-orientalism. Today we could call it techno-orientalism. Like there are representations of Japanese Superman, like technology, Tokyo and San Francisco, that kind of Oriental fantasy. This is really the early kind of fantasy of techno-orientalism, because to the American imagination, Chinese laundrymen, they are basically Iron Man. They don't need to sleep. They work all night, all night long and everything. So when Congress passed the infamous 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, the senator from California, John Miller, at the time, we have a Senate race again this year, right? But that senator from California, he stood up, he said, the reason we need to pass this Chinese Exclusion Act, look at these laundrymen. These are like Iron Man, they are rats, but they work, they take our jobs because they have the amazing capacity to suffer, to endure pain and the tiredness. That's called a techno-orientalism. On the one hand, you're subhuman, on the other hand, you're superhuman. So this is kind of, the laundry is kind of interesting to me in the Anna May Wong story, not just because of, her birth in the laundry, but also a larger story is that, the Chinese-American experience and how actually it's tied up with early technology of cinema. So anyway, so growing up in vicinity of Chinatown, with the rise of, Hollywood, the film industry, and of course, like all teenage or young women, at the time called us movie-struck girls, and people come from Ohio, Midwest, you name it, little town. You buy a one-way train ticket, you step off Central Station, later on Union Station, you want to try to, make it into the business. Fortunately for Anna May Wong, she did not need to buy any train ticket. She just, Hollywood actually came up to her because of what I said. The film crew will go to Chinatown every day to shoot the scenes. And so she will play hooky from school and hang out, trying to get a part. But she was too young at the time because she will frequent the set so often. She actually had a nickname called the CCC. It's the Curious Chinese Child. That's the film crew gave her a nickname because she always hang out all the time. And eventually she got lucky, okay? And this has to do not with COVID, but with Spanish flu. It's 100 years before the Spanish flu. COVID, there was this Spanish flu, right? At the end of World War I, there was worldwide, global pandemic, killing millions of people. And in that year, 1918, Hollywood was making two major, what we call the China flicks. And these are films about China or China themed. One is Broken Blossom, directed by W.D. Griffith, the maker of Birth of Nation, right? Major filmmaker. But the other one is also a major China production. It's called The Red Lantern, starring Alla Nazimova, who is a Ukrainian actress. She was really the queen of silent film. And she was the first one who really became rich, transitioned from stage acting to film. And she made a lot of money and bought a Spanish house on 8080 Sunset Boulevard. It's also dubbed 8080 Club. And she played, a Chinese, character in this Red Lantern. And for that film, because it's supposedly based on a story about Boxer Rebellion, in Peking, old Peking. And for that film, they need about 600 Chinese extras for the scenes, for the mob scene. And imagine, during pandemic, people are dying on the street. It's very difficult to scare up 600 live bodies. So that's when Anna May Wong eventually was drafted. So she got a part. And this is a crucial scene in which Anna May Wong appeared. But we still don't know which one is Anna May Wong, okay? Even herself didn't know. So she was very excited, okay? She finally got a part, and she was one of the 3 lantern carriers on the outside. And so she saved up, before the film came out, she saved like a whole week of lunch money and then treated her friends, so they bought tickets and went to see the show. When the scene came on, her friend said, "Which one is you?" And she said, "I don't know," actually. So it remains a mystery of film history. But anyway, because of her youth, her talent, and her beauty, Alla Nazimova basically kind of noticed her immediately. And Alla Nazimova is well known not just because she was the queen of silent cinema, but she was also the woman who coined the term called the sewing circle, which is a code for lesbian actors. And every Sunday, she throw a lot of parties, cocktail parties and everything. But she also has Sunday afternoon special for young girls only, and that's where actually Anna May Wong got to meet a lot of the heavyweights of Hollywood, the film industry. And this is Anna May Wong, young Anna May Wong, sitting in this swimming pool because Alla Nazimova, her house is called the Garden of Allah, and she built this swimming pool in the shape of the Black Sea because she's nostalgic about Ukraine, right, the Black Sea. And through the initiation in this Garden of Allah, or 8080 Club, and this daughter of a Chinese laundryman was really ready to break out of her cocoon. So she did continued to have some bit parts in the ensuing years until 1922. Okay, she was cast as the lead for the silent film, The Toll of the Sea. So this is very unusual because, as we know, earlier I talked about Charlie Chan, right? In those decades, it's just unthinkable that any Asian star actor will play any lead, with the exception, of course, Setsu Hayakawa. Okay, and that's also a good friend of Anna May Wong. And we can talk about him later if you are interested. But for her, for a woman, it was just unthinkable because it's always, it's always yellow face. Okay, it's always white actresses who will play Chinese, female characters. And the reason that she was cast, not just because of her beauty, her talent alone, actually, was done for a very cynical reason, and that's why history is so interesting, or cultural history for that matter. Tall the Sea is supposedly really the first major Technicolor film. Okay, from the beginning, filmmakers were heavily invested in the color technology, because in the black-white film, at least that kind of black-white technology at that time, all Caucasian characters' faces look pale and consumptive. Okay, they don't look beautiful, especially if you have blue eyes. Blue eyes in the black and white, technology, they look really dull. So the filmmakers were very much, interested in doing color film. But for this one, because they really needed real Asian characters to test how good the color, whether or not they could differentiate. Therefore, for that cynical reason, she was cast as the lead, and the extras, the supporting roles will also, have real Chinese actors. So this is, done for a very cynical reason. And this is a Madame Butterfly story. Okay, this Madame Butterfly story, and the film was actually very successful commercially. The technology wasn't very successful. The film critics lamented, like, no, you can still tell them apart. The white, people and the Asian people, they still look alike in this color film. But the film itself grossed $250,000. Actually, it was a blockbuster, and that led to the next film. Again, another silent film. This is A Thief of Baghdad, starring Douglas Fairbanks. And this is a major production. So Anna May Wong played this Mongol maid. And so she was becoming really a big star. And this is, of course, this Chinese theater. This is the Mecca of Hollywood, built in 1927. 1927 is really the height of the kind of Hollywood's Oriental kind of frenzy. Why would you build a Chinese theater in the heart? Because today, that's where the tourist attraction is, the center, and that's where the Walk of Fame, and everything start out. So I call this like the Mecca, Oriental Mecca of Hollywood. So 1927, there were at least 4 called the China flicks, films about China, not just the theater, but the stories, films about China. For whatever reason, people are always kind of crazy about these kind of foreign, exotic themes, stories. And Anna May Wong was in every single one of them, all these 4 major productions. But the dilemma is that no film, China film, can do without her, but no film can really have her as the lead. So it's really the virtual form of foot binding in some sense, because not just because of racism, but also the taboos. For instance, no interracial kissing, no interracial romance. This kind of Hollywood's don'ts. Later on will turn into the Hays production codes, kind of codified. But this is what I talked about, the earlier kind of self-censorship by Hollywood filmmakers. And because of that, her career reached a dilemma. And that's why when the opportunity came, she took off for Germany. And so she traveled to Germany in the spring of 1928 with her sister Lulu. And this is they were standing on the balcony of a hotel in Berlin. Her arrival in Germany in the spring of 1928 is interesting because she did not just join the exodus of colored artists such as Paul Robeson, Josephine Baker, all these kind of ethnic artists and actors. They had to flee America because of racism to look for greener pasture, to use the cliche. Of course, it doesn't mean Europe did not have problem with racism. This is 1928. But 1928 really is the period called the Weimar Republic, right? Weimar Republic was a period, sudden kind of explosion of creativity, like Three Penny, opera, Dadaism, the cinema and everything before the rise of the Nazis. In a few years down the road, men in brown shirts and billy clubs will come out of the shadow. Okay, but this is a period, so it's kind of interesting that she arrived in Germany at the right time. So she had actually really a splash. Come without Hollywood's kind of this kind of production code, censorship hovering over her, she at least enjoyed a few years of kind of artistic freedom, and she did a number of really great films. And this is a very iconic picture. Standing in the middle, this was taken in the fall of 1928, the year she arrived in Germany. On this side, of course, the famous Marlene Dietrich. On the other side is Leni Riefenstahl. Okay. Marlene Dietrich later on will come to America, right, and become a naturalized citizen. And Hitler tried to get her back, but she eventually had to give up her German citizenship and stayed in the United States. So her story, I'm pretty sure it's familiar to you. But Leni later on became what is called Hitler's camera woman, because she ended up making kind of propaganda films for Hitler. So if you were interested in 20th century history, you only need to track the three kind of trajectories of the stories of these three women, how they end up differently, and basically. But when this picture was taken, the real star was actually Anna May Wong, because this is 1928. Marlene Dietrich was famous, but not that famous. She had not made this film Blue Angel, which would really propel her to stardom. And Leni had not become Hitler's camera woman yet. So Anna May Wong was really the talk of the town. But because of her race, her identity, you see, her story has kind of certain limit, constraint. She moved on to England to make this, what I call the swan song of silent film, which is Piccadilly. It's a beautiful film, it's a silent film. And she did like extraordinary, scenes of dancing and facial expression and a costume, fashion show to some extent. And of course here, there's an attempt to kiss, but of course no kiss that will happen. Because of the success, her extraordinary kind of performance, she was invited to play a lead role in this British play called The Circle of Chalk, which is actually based on a classical Chinese play. And here's interesting. So she's starring in this play next to the young Laurence Olivier. The minute she spoke, remember, all this time she was extraordinary as an actor, but these are all silent films. Okay, she will mime, but you never hear her speak, right? And we are now talking about the town of Shakespeare. British theater is really serious art. The minute she spoke opened her mouth, her California twang came out. And people were appalled. British, like, you can't, speak on the British stage, California accent. And of course, she realized, what she needed to do. And this is a crucial period because film was transitioning from silent to talkie. And many kind of silent stars will fall by the wayside. The moment they open their mouth, the charm is basically gone. Like even Greta Garbo, for instance, her first line was shocking, and she would say something, "Give me a whiskey, and the lemonade on the side. Don't be stingy, baby." And the audience was shocked, because before you don't hear the European accent. Now suddenly she was speaking this kind of irritating accent. So Anna May Wong ended up actually hiring a speech coach from Oxford. She paid a lot of money, and so she left America like young, flapper, speaking natural California English. When she returned to America in 1930, she was wearing European design clothes, okay, and she was sporting mid-Atlantic, upper-class British accent. So she basically transformed herself. She survived the transition from silent to talkie, but she also survived this kind of important transition in terms of accent. And that's when she came back, and she played Daughter of the Dragon, from which my book, took its title. She's starring next to Setsu Hayakawa, the very famous, important person for Asian American history, especially film history. And she played this doctor, Dr. Fu Manchu, okay, in which I already talked about, Warner Olin playing Dr. Fu Manchu, and she's playing the daughter. Cool. This is really, people ask me, like, what is your favorite Anna May Wong film? I wouldn't say Daughter of the Dragon. Daughter of the Dragon is a vintage Anna May Wong, but it's not really my favorite. This film is important because it really cemented her legacy. Okay, earlier we have Madame Butterfly character in Toll of the Sea, and this is the other extreme, is the Dragon Lady. So between Madame Butterfly, self-sacrificing Asian woman, to this kind of devious, power-grabbing Asian tiger mother. So her career is basically kind of sandwiched in this kind of limited space between these kind of stereotypical roles. I think it's amazing that she actually managed to carve some space for herself. And importantly, of course, cut a path for later young generation of Asian American actors. So her next film was Shanghai Express, directed by Joseph Long Sternberg. And this is Marlene Dietrich, of course, was the star, and she was playing second fiddle to Marlene. But she actually held her ground, it's actually extraordinary performance. The other thing I want to talk about Anna May Wong is her sense of fashion. So today, in American culture, she's not just known for these film roles, she's also known for what? Fashion. So when her film career wasn't, when she wasn't able to find big parts in films, she managed at least to, survive as a fashion icon. So she's known for this kind of nail guards. And as a professor, I often imagine I can have some of these nail guards. If I ask you a question, like a Dr. Fu Manchu, you better answer the question correctly, right? So this is really one of my favorite pictures of Anna May Wong showing off her nail guards. And this is actually Empress Dowager's real nail guards. This is like 9-inch long nail guards. And speaking of middle finger, and once again, fashion show. So she has this amazing talent to turn working class symbols, like a coolie hat, a coolie jacket, into high class fashion. So anything she wears will become high fashion. So she has really this kind of unique ability to do that. And this is a Shanghai, a picture of Shanghai Bond, famous one. And because she went to China in 1936, after she was heartbroken because she failed to get a part in The Good Earth, the major film China film production based on Pearl Bach's award-winning novel. And so she was really disappointed, pissed off. It's not just her disappointment. Today in retrospect, as film scholars will say, this is really the insult to Asian American community, because this, to quote one film scholar, Asian American scholar, who said this could have been our Gone with the Wind, but literally it's gone with the wind because most of the Asian roles, major Asian roles will go to Caucasian actors, and the real Asian actors will be the ambience hovering in the background. And this is a film about China, a Chinese farmer and his wife, the saga, and everything. But anyway, so she spent 9 months traveling in China, and she went there kind of before the Japanese invasion. So she was touring China in Hong Kong, and she met up with Warner Olin, who was actually also very popular in China because of the Charlie Chan films, right? And she eventually collected a lot of the wardrobes of Peking opera. She was interested in introducing Peking opera to the world, and old Peking, I'm going to skip forward. So when the Sino-Japanese War broke out, she starred in this Daughter of Shanghai, made in 1937. It's like more kind of in support of China relief. And this is the only film in which Anna May Wong's character had a happy ending, romantic ending. And that was because she was partnering with Philip Ahn. Philip Ahn, Korean-American actor. Actually, they're high school friends, who's possibly gay. So it's kind of very strange when Hollywood rumor mill got wind of this kind of, this film, there's these two Asian stars, they're also high school chums. They must be, lovers for that reason. And interestingly, neither of them will try to dispel the rumor. They actually, to some extent, in a kind of a pre-Stonewall, world, imagine how precarious it is. Even for Caucasian actors, if you're gay, those were the years when they have what's called a lavender couples. They're using each other. The people get married, to fend off the probing eyes of the public, because the morality clause that the studios can invoke to end your career is actually hanging over you. So, but these two, Asian American actors, originally marginalized, and so they were basically kind of using each other, in some sense, to fend off. So that's why they didn't want to spell any rumor about their romance. And from the pictures we have today of Anna May Wong, as you know, so people today ask me, like, especially historians, they're constantly looking for this called a smoking gun. Like, is Anna May Wong really lesbian, or is she really gay? My sense, my answer is always, like, look at these pictures, that I think she's very experimental, willing to, she hangs out with Marlene Dietrich, with Leni Riefenstahl and everything. But she's also, she also dated men as well, as we know. It doesn't mean you have to be gay, or, it's about what you do, right? It's really about what you do. It's really about the possibility of doing different things. So for her, it's the coded messages, her costume, her gesture, that eventually is something we have to study, rather than say, are you really gay? I don't think that's actually a very interesting question for that matter. So for the sake of time, I'm going to fast forward. In wartime, she did pour her heart actually into the war relief effort. She donated her cash, her salary, auctioned off her costumes, the qipao she collected from her China trip and everything. And I'm going to skip forward. So in her late years, we're talking about 1950s, because when she hit, late 30, her career was already going down the hill. And the Anna May Wong story is not just about racism or sexism. It's also about ageism as well. Because for Hollywood especially, ageism is really it continued to be an issue, right? So her late, career, the last decade of her life, wasn't very a happy one. So she would hold a drink in one hand and a cigarette in the other. And the former daughter of the dragon will often hang out at this bar restaurant called the Dragon's Den in downtown LA at the time. It's no longer there. It was actually run by the C siblings, Lisa C, the famous, her family C, the siblings will run that. And she will hang out and tell corny jokes and play poker, chain smoke, and have fun with friends. And this is also a haven for the gays and lesbian people as well in the 1950s. And so she eventually, this is a picture taken, in San Francisco. Her last film, actually, A Portrait Black, and she was, this picture taken right here. She, just like, Sunset Boulevard, Norma Desmond, always looking for the big comeback. Norma Desmond said, I'm still big. It's only the picture is getting smaller because of film to television set. The pictures are getting smaller. And just like that, Anna May Wong was also constantly looking for a big comeback. Actually, her comeback was going to happen because she was cast for a big part in the Flower Drum Song. Again, Broadway show turned into a major film production. She had a big part, actually. An Liang, eventually the role went to Juanita Hall, this African-American player. And she was supposed to play that. But unfortunately, she died of a heart attack at the age of 56 at a home in Santa Monica. And, by her side, actually there was the screenplay for our drum song. The film was going to start shooting next month, but she was just, working really hard trying for the big comeback. So her story is really, it's the gist. Today she's buried with her mother and her younger sister. And there's the Anna May Wong kind of star in the Walk of Fame. But of course, very importantly is the issuing of the Anna May Wong coins. Today, if you use cash, buy coffee, if you get lucky, you'll get one of these Anna May Wong coins. It was issued in 2022. And of course, this honor, a tribute, long overdue, right? But for somebody, like me, who have tracked her career in awe and admiration, I always know she's always on the money, to use a betting term, right? She's always on the money. So, like I said, Louise, asked me to recommend some of the readings. So Joseph von Sternberg, Finding the Chinese Laundry, it really tells you a lot about early Hollywood. And China is really, Chinatown hovers in the background. But it's a very important kind of background for us to understand. That's why I said my trilogy is really trying to tell the epic journeys of Asian Americans, the making American culture, how important, the Asian American experience is to the American experience in general, right? It's not like a marginalized story that need to be told. It's actually essential to the making of American culture. For instance, Charlie Chan, like racism, right? Yellowface. Yellowface is about racial ventriloquism. Racial ventriloquism really lies at the heart of American identity. Boston Tea Party, it's a racial mimicry. It's a bunch of Bostonians, dressed up as Mohawk Indians, came on the ship and dumped chests of tea into and that's the founding myth of the United States of America. Right there, it's racial mimicry. So for us to study Asian American story, we need to understand how America is actually made exactly in this way. Not just this is racism against Chinese American. No, it's actually, yes, it is racism, but it's also how America was made. That's how important that, the second book is The Chinatown War. This is, you guys are here in Northern California, but the Southern California story is about, Los Angeles, Chinatown. It's more like a frontier story to some extent. And, but very importantly, for those who are really kind of want to continue to research the Anna May Wong story, I would strongly encourage you, and this is very convenient, Beinecke Library, Yale University, they have about over 200 Anna May Wong letters, handwritten letters. And some of the letters written from China, from a China trip, but mostly to her friends, Carl Van Vechten and his wife. And one thing I discovered researching this book, and no other biographer ever mentioned this, is that I figured out what a beautiful writer she is, actually. She has a unique ability, not just to do fashion, to acting. She barely graduated from high school, self-taught, actually. She writes beautifully, to a point that when when my editor was going through my manuscript, one day he called me. He said, "Yunte, do you think Anna May Wong has a ghostwriter?" It's like, come on, Bob. No sane person will hire a ghostwriter to write personal letters to friends, right? So these letters are all digitized. You can just go online. You can see everything, see postcards, and they did an amazing job of scanning, digitize this a treasure trove. Okay, I think for the sake of time, I'm going to stop there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.